Good morning, everyone. My name is Erin Turbot. I'm the communication lead with the Department of Workforce Services, and I am thrilled to welcome you to today's virtual training series, Driving Internal Customer Service for Organizational Success. This series was created based on your feedback, and we're excited to bring you topics that matter most to you. Be sure to check out our website at dws.wyo.gov/VTS. Tricia is putting that link in the chat, and that's for any upcoming sessions, registration, as well as recordings of past events. Today's session is going to be recorded, and those materials will be available on our site within a few days, probably in the next 2 days or so. If you have questions during the presentation, just pop them in the chat and our presenter will answer them at the end of the hour. Now go ahead and continue answering, if you would, the opening question: what do you hope to get out of today's presentation? And let's go ahead and dive in. Please welcome me in joining today's speaker, Tony Cross, the Chief Human Resources Officer for Jackson Hole Airport. Tony, welcome.
Thank you, Erin. Good morning, everybody. I have been reading through some of your responses to this question on what do you hope to get out of today's presentation, and just start by saying I hope I can provide some of this. A lot of great answers to this question so far. Just quickly, I want to introduce myself. My name is Tony Cross. I'm the Chief Human Resources Officer at the Jackson Hole Airport. I apologize if there's a lot of noise during this. Sometimes airplanes will come and park outside my window, and I can't really control that. I've been in this role for just a little bit over 10 years, but I've been a career human resources professional. I got my start a little over 30 years ago at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. Fascinating job. I learned a lot there. And in between, I've worked at a lot of different types of companies, staffing companies, a technology company, a global structured finance company. My focus is in human resources, and that's going to be not the only lens that we look at this through which we look at the subject today, but kind of that's my natural focus. Also, I'm honored to have to say that I'm part of the Wyoming Workforce Development Council. I've been in that role for the last 4 or so years, and fingers crossed, hopefully we'll be reappointed in the next couple of months. And then lastly, I just want to say thank you very much to all the staff at the Department of Workforce Services for their really essential help in getting me organized and kind of helping to structure today's presentation. So let me get my slideshow going here. So as Erin mentioned, we've called this Driving Internal Customer Service for Organizational Success. I'm going to go right to the items that I hope to cover today. Just really quickly, what is internal customer service? We'll talk about some definitions there. Who are internal customers? Why is internal customer service important? Who's responsible for it? I'm going to share a few strategies that I've found to be successful on implementing a culture of service, and I'll do a little sort of miniature case study in that section. I'm going to talk about some of the challenges in providing internal customer service. And then the last bullet is kind of a big one, but mission, vision, value statements that we could probably, schedule a whole different session on that. But I'm just going to touch on that briefly and how that kind of feeds into some of the other subjects from today. And as Erin said, as I go, please enter any questions or comments or anything into the chat, and I'm looking forward to those probably most of all at the end of my part here. So starting with what is internal customer service, I want to start by saying that there is no actual definitive answer to this. There's a lot of websites, there's a lot of books. There are probably as many definitions of internal customer service that you want to find, you could find. I'm going to talk about my experience and kind of how I see it. But I want to just, emphasize it's not a defined methodology. It's not something you're going to get a certification in or something. It's going to be a little bit different for every employee or every company. I'm also going to refer to it as ICS because it's a bit of a tongue twister for me to say internal customer service over and over again. Um, so when I say that, just what I'm referring to. Um, what I've kind of settled on over the course of my career is it's a service-oriented approach to problem solving. That's the simplest and easiest way for me to put it. Um, a lot of folks will say, think of your employees or your coworkers or whomever as customers. Approach them the way you would a customer. That's a great approach. Um, I tend to, in my work, apply it to problem solving. It's something that can help improve an employee experience. That's a lot of things. Um, and that kind of ties to the next bullet where I put that it's really anything that supports an employee with resources, motivation, and support for the personal goals and professional goals. So to be specific, this could take many forms. It could be IT support. It could be your maintenance department coming to, fix a broken light fixture in your office. In my function, internal customer service could take the form of payroll, benefits, a wellness program, an employee assistance program, things like that. Professional development for employees is a huge part of internal customer service. But I want to pause for a second and say that I think um, compensation and benefits are a big part of what companies do to offer a form of internal customer service to employees. Um, if your employees are happy and they feel supported, and I'm going to probably say this a lot in this presentation, that if they feel supported both personally and professionally, then that's going to hopefully lead to some good things. We'll talk about that a little bit more. So yes, it's an approach to dealing with problem solving, and I'm going to give more examples as we go through it. But it could just be something as simple as really good health coverage that supports the needs of an employee base. When it's done well, internal customer service can build trust and employee engagement. Ideally, it'll reinforce your company culture. Again, there's no playbook that everyone can follow on this. It's going to be a little different depending on where you work. Who are internal customers? The only hint I'm going to give you is that it's not this moose. But I would ask to take a moment. I'm curious to see who do you think internal customers are? I'm just going to, if you could put your comments into the chat. I'm just curious to see what folks say real quick. We're not going to take too long, but I'm seeing a lot of coworkers, yep, colleagues, staff, everyone at Workforce Services, yes. Wow, these are great answers. Peers, yep. A lot of people saying everyone. I agree. So the way that I've divided this up is, sorry, one second, I switched back from the chat. I divide this in my mind into three groups: employees, stakeholders, community. So the easy one is employees of a company, coworkers, managers, your boss, the people who report to you. I'm the HR person at this company. Everyone who works here is my internal customer. I may have different levels of interaction with any of them over the course of time, but everyone who works at this airport is a customer of mine. I have an opportunity to interact with everyone in different ways. The term stakeholders is a term that I use and that we use here at this airport for people or entities that are not ours, but that are part of the work that we do every day. So, for example, at the airport, it's airlines, rental car companies, taxi drivers, restaurant employees. It's everybody that makes our airport work. So they're not part of our company, but we still treat them as internal customers and use this sort of service-oriented approach because they make our business work. Um, we could do internal customer service really well in the airport, as our, the airport organization itself. But if we're not interacting similarly with the airlines, those relationships are going to break down. Stakeholders are going to be different from any business that you work in or that you work for. I say it could be a payroll provider, for example, any external vendor. Um, it could be the person who delivers the UPS packages. That's probably a really important internal customer to a lot of people. Um, so that's kind of my concept of stakeholders. And then I put the term community here. This one I think is a little murkier. So I'm going to give you an example. So the airport that I work at here in Teton County, we're the only commercial service airport that's located entirely in a national park. So we work with the National Park Service every day because we are literally a tenant of the park. I make the joke, it's not true, but it's not that far off, that we can't mow the lawn without their permission. Um, or their, partnership is maybe a better word. So, the park is an example, or the Park Service is an example of the community that we serve. Now, I recognize that as an airport, we are a more public-facing entity. We've got the traveling public, and a lot of different, our local community, our global community of travelers, the Park Service, like I mentioned, it's going to be different wherever you work. But I think that understanding how your business, where your business sits in your community is potentially a part of this. We treat the National Park Service with the same service-oriented approach, internal customer service, because we understand that everything that happens here, um, from the lights we leave on at night to the noise that's created when an airplane takes off, is affecting them and everyone who travels inside of Grand Teton National Park. So that's kind of an example of what I mean by community. I saw a lot of people in the chat answer everyone. I agree with that. I think everyone that you interact with at work is a potential internal customer. Why is it important? Subjective question. As I've mentioned before, I think that when it's done well, it can build trust and engagement and employee satisfaction. It can reinforce company culture. Um, in a more practical sense, I believe that it helps increase employee retention. Going back to something that I talked about a couple of slides ago, when employees feel supported and like the company cares, or their coworkers care, or their manager cares about their personal and professional goals, you got a better chance of retaining that employee. Everyone knows that employee retention is a challenge for almost everybody. I don't know anyone who isn't struggling with this. Um, and that kind of also, leads to the competitive environment that we live in. I was just looking the other day, the national unemployment rate is around 4% right now, which is a multi-decade low. As of December 2024, the unemployment rate in Wyoming is 3.5%, and there are some counties in our state that are even lower than that. So it's not all about getting people and keeping people, but those are some really practical examples of why it can be important. I see internal customer service as a culture building piece. And so again, something that can reinforce company culture. Who's responsible for providing it? Again, not these three bison that you see. I just left the visual in there to create a little space. Again, I'm going to ask just quickly if you could put into the chat your thoughts. Whose job is it to provide internal customer service? Yep. Again, great answers in here. Thank you, everybody, for this. Yep. Sorry, I'm just reading and responding on screen here. All right, I'm gonna keep going. Again, great answers and thank you for that. Most people that I saw in the chat got the same answer that I did. It's everyone. everyone in the organization. I always say, you know, from the CEO to the person who's starting their first day in the mailroom, um, I think everyone is responsible. It's not, you know, there are some functions like the ones that I've mentioned, HR, IT, maintenance, payroll. Those are naturally service-oriented functions in most companies, but it's not owned by those people. It's not a management initiative that everyone needs to follow. I did notice in the chat, a lot of people said, in the quick time that I was looking at it, it starts with management or it's a top-down thing. I think that's true. That can be the case. If it doesn't have management support, it's unlikely to work. But at the same time, it can't just be a management initiative that everyone goes, oh yeah, we got to do our internal customer service. They sent a big email about it, so now everybody do this. That's not going to work either. Everyone really kind of has to own this approach. If everyone's using it in some way, in some small way, it's not an orthodoxy, but it's just a way of looking at, like I said, a service-oriented approach to problem solving. Whatever that problem is, it could be a huge institutional problem. It could be the problem of, you know, to use a kind of funny example, this is an actual problem we had where the UPS person was dropping the packages in the wrong place. You know, it could be something simple like that. If everyone is using this approach in a small way, I think it can be successful. It's not going to work if only some people are doing it, and it's definitely not going to work if it's just management going, we're all about internal customer service, and everyone's going, okay, I got enough to do, but I'll try to do that. So I both say that, but agree that that it's got to be management supported to be successful. All right, so a few strategies on implementing a culture of service. Again, I'm going to take you through what I see as the basic components of this. And then I'm going to go back through this slide again and give you a little mini case study of something that we've done. Again, you know, my focus is on the airport that I, you know, work at, and I've been here for a number of years. So those are the types of examples that I'm going to give you. I don't mean to make this a presentation that's too focused on the Jackson Hole Airport or aviation or whatever, but it's just the world that I live in. So first, generally speaking, the strategies that I follow are ask, listen and acknowledge, use data, take a closer look, and I'm going to talk about what I mean by that, and continuous communication. So ask people what they need. This can take many forms. You could do an employee survey. You could do exit interviews when people leave. I do an exit interview for every person that leaves this airport and I ask them, what did we do right? What could we have done better? You know, is there something we could have done that would have kept you here? Those are my three basic questions. A lot of companies have started doing something. I'm sure many of you are already doing this, what's called a stay interview. So instead of waiting for someone to leave, you check in with people periodically, maybe once a year or twice a year, and say, how's it going? Any feedback? We want you to stay. What's that going to take? You know, another form of asking. Performance reviews and feedback is another form of asking employees, coworkers, et cetera, what they need. I'll share that here at the airport, when we do performance reviews, it's a collaborative structure. So I've had a lot of performance reviews where people go, you know, my manager will say, well, you did good at this. You could have done better at that. Here's 3 things you got to do this year. Sign the paper, talk to you in a year. And that's it. That's not really a very service-oriented approach. Again, you know, it's not a one-size-fits-all model, but the way that we do it here is the employee comes with a list of with a self-evaluation. They come with a list of goals, things that they're interested in doing. Their manager comes with the same thing, an employee evaluation and a list of goals, and we look at how those two things match up, and we make a plan for each employee for the next year. So you may or may not get to do all the things you want, but employees have input into what their goals are going to be for the next year. Again, it's a form of asking. Debriefing is another way to ask for feedback. I work in an industry that's heavy on debriefing. I'm going to talk about that a little more later. We debrief everything. We can barely have a conversation around here without going, how did that go? How did I do? Could I have done something differently that would have been more clear? Um, we have a very transparent feedback culture, and that's a way of, getting information from coworkers or managers or anybody. It's as important as it is to ask for feedback and input. You've got to listen and acknowledge to that, or acknowledge what you've heard. I'm sure I'm not the only person who, I'll use the performance review example again. I'm sure I'm not the only person who's gotten a review in their lifetime where I've said, I'd really like to work on this, or I think this went well, or this didn't go well. And the person on the other side of the table goes, uh-huh. And then we never talk about it again. Listening and acknowledging is really important. Respond to what people are saying and what they ask for. Provide feedback on what they're asking for, and be transparent on how that's going. I'm going to give you more examples of that later, but be transparent in your response. Use data to support a case study for anything. It's unlikely that anyone is going to get anything significant done without data to support it. And again, more about that in a moment. Take a closer look at the data is really important. And then, communicate always. Communicate steps, give progress reports, follow up with people. And, I'll get to my mini case study in a second, but I'll just share, I think this is a very basic thing that I'm sure everyone has experienced. If I have a deadline on Thursday at 5 p.m., and I tell my boss at noon that I'm not going to make that deadline, that's not great. If I tell him on Wednesday or Tuesday, I'm anticipating missing this deadline and I think I can hit it on Friday, is that going to work? Or can we readjust some things so I can hit the Thursday deadline? That's a case of continuous communication. It's proactive, giving progress reports, communicating what's going right and what's going wrong. So to give you a little bit more kind of brass tacks, I'm going to talk through, and this is the most airport specific part of this presentation today. So thanks for bearing with me on that. This is my mini case study of this type of strategy. When I started at this airport in 2014, we did not have any HR statistics here. And in 2015, at the end of 2015, we ran our employee turnover for the first time. It was 33% of our staff. Huge number. We noticed that every time somebody left, it was because of something having to do with housing. Maybe it wasn't they lost their housing, but maybe it was too expensive, or they couldn't find what they wanted, or they needed a place where they could have horses or whatever, and they couldn't make it work, so they left the area. We found like a lot of that 33% turnover was just people leaving the area. So the first thing we did is we created an employee survey to ask our employees for more detail about their circumstances and also what they want and need. And in that, we had a ton of questions on housing costs, transportation cost, total household income, demographics, at least the demographics that we didn't have. And we also asked for a lot of job satisfaction questions, and we asked our employees to rate every single benefit that we had at the time in terms of how satisfied they were with that benefit and also how important that benefit was to them. So that was the way that we started asking our employees what we needed, or sorry, what they needed. Well, we is appropriate. I'm also an employee. We then listened to that. We let our employees know we hear you, and what you've said. We gave them a summary of what we learned from the survey. And we said, anyone who wants a copy of every single question and how, the kind of rated answers or percent answers or whatever, we condensed all the data into like a pretty extensive report. We offered that to anyone who wanted to read it. And we also, we got about 97% participation in that survey, which mainly occurred through individual nagging, meaning me going around to people's office, putting it on their desk and saying, do this. But, we acknowledged the effort that people put into it and the gratitude that we had for that. We started by saying, look, this is a lot of information, a lot of feedback. There were a lot of ideas that people shared on the problems that they had and potential solutions. And we just started by saying, it's probably going to take us a couple of months minimum just to digest this information. That was our first form of sort of acknowledging, what had been communicated by our staff. Unsurprisingly, a lot of people identified housing problems, the same ones that I referred to. So we started looking externally for data to support what we were seeing. Our first stop in the sort of using data department of this was we looked at economic data in the state of Wyoming that breaks down cost of housing in each county. And we found something really weird, which is that the average cost of housing as reported by the state in Teton County was way higher than the average cost of housing that our employees reported. So in other words, their housing was cheaper. That was strange. That didn't really make sense because people were leaving for housing reasons, yet they were way below the reported average for this county. So we dug a little deeper into the data. And this is kind of what I mean by taking a closer look. And we discovered that half of our employees don't even live in this county. So they have economic challenges related to commuting or wear and tear on their cars or replacing tires and things like that. We also found a financial model from the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies, which is called Housing Cost Burden. And I'm going to get into the weeds for a reason here, but just thank you for bearing with me. And this model, in short, puts people into three buckets in terms of how their total income rates as a comparison, or sorry, their cost of housing rates as a percentage of total income. So essentially, the model says if you pay less than 30% of your total income for housing, that's no burden, and then 30 to 50% is a medium housing cost burden. Greater than 50% of your total income towards your housing cost is considered severe. And we took all of our employees and their reported income and their total household income, and we plugged it into this model. And that's when we found that over 50% of our employees have a severe housing cost burden. 85% of them were above where they should be. Only 15% of our people were in that less than 30% category, which is where we want to see people be. And that was our answer. We found that by taking a closer look. Why is everybody leaving because of housing reasons? Well, the state average is just one piece of data, but when we used this model, we got a much more clear look at our employee base. That was a really light bulb moment for all of us. We also used an MIT financial tool called a living wage calculator, which breaks down expenses by commuting and all that. Again, we plugged our hourly wages into that and got a lot more information. And so using all of this data from our employees as well as external sources, we were able to work with our board of directors and our management team to kind of come up with a suite of benefits that we implemented over about a year period. It included a housing stipend, a move-in loan program to support people who lost housing or who had an opportunity to put a mortgage down but couldn't afford a down payment, things like that, and a bunch of other professional development stuff. As we were doing this, we continuously communicated. We said, hey, here's a lot of great ideas that we got. Here's some that we're working on. Here's when our board is going to look at our report and review what we've recommended. It wasn't too much detail, but just so that people don't think, oh yeah, well, we did all that and nothing happened. Management doesn't care. They forgot about everything we need. And part of that communication was, as we went through the years, we started at 33% turnover. By the way, we estimated our annual turnover cost conservatively at around $500,000 a year with that, replacement cost and unquantifiables and all that. Another data point that helped get some of these decisions across the board. But we were happily able to communicate that a year after we implemented these new benefits, we were at 17% turnover. In 2023, we were at 4% turnover, and we communicate these things too. So people, again, not to, be overly repetitive, but we asked, we let them know that we heard them. We did a lot of research in the background while communicating about what we were doing. And then we've communicated our successes. And we've also communicated things that don't work so well. I give this example because I personally find it funny, but as you can imagine, here in Teton County, um, everybody wants a ski pass benefit. They want a ski pass discount, and a lot of companies have them. And the people at the Jackson Hole Airport that want a ski pass discount are very passionate about expressing that. What we found in our employee survey is that about 3% of our employees care about the ski pass benefit at all. It was rated the least important of all of our benefits. And so now, and we don't offer one. So now when someone comes in and goes, why the hell is this place, everybody offers the ski pass benefit and I need to ski or whatever. I've got stuff to show them to say, hey, we asked everybody, you're kind of in the minority. We decided to take all that money and dedicate it somewhere else to this other benefit that you have. So again, another form of communication or continuous communication. Sorry if I belabored that a little bit. Okay, let's talk about challenges. These are things that happen in workplaces every day. Difficult conversations, counseling and performance feedback, having to say no to somebody. If you think of customer service or internal customer service as the customer is always right, it's hard to do these types of things in that context. And I've got a few ideas that I'm going to talk through on this, but I just want to acknowledge, it doesn't feel service oriented for me to sit in a room with someone and say, hey, this is your, final warning on your performance issues. And the next time we talk, it's, going to be the end of your employment. That's not a very service oriented approach. But I think I still try to find ways, even in things like difficult conversations, to have that perspective. So I had an example come up the other day. There was an employee who was having a conflict with some other employees. It was over a really small thing. We have in the private aviation side of the business, we have a proprietary system for entering invoices. And this person enters invoices in a specific way. And there's multiple ways to enter it. And she came to me going, this is so annoying. Like everyone else is doing it wrong. They're entering these invoices this way, this way, this way. And I asked him, like, what's wrong with you? Everybody knows it's supposed to be this way. And, it was really simple. I just said, instead of saying you're annoying me with how you enter this invoice, you could just go to the person and say, hey, I noticed that you're entering the invoices differently than what I understood, was kind of how we were supposed to do it. So I'm curious to know, like, why are you doing that way, or how did you land there? And also, can we, sort of join our two approaches, or can we talk about the best way to do it? Like, can we brainstorm it together? Again, it's a little bit of de-escalation, but it's a little bit of just, treating them um, in a non-reactionary way, in a service-oriented way, and trying to take that approach to problem solving. The word service is a trigger, is not triggering, but it's a loaded word, because I think a lot of people think it infers that you're supposed to do what the other person wants. And I don't really see it that way. I think, that example that came up the other day of the person approaching it in a more collaborative way is another form of service. Many of you maybe have had to deal with an underperforming coworker or someone who you need to work with who's consistently not getting, what you need, or you're not getting what you need from them. Again, you can approach that in a service-oriented way. You could say, you know, apologies, I like to use really overly simple examples, but I might say, my understanding was that you were going to make the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches at noon every day, and it's been coming around at 12:30, and I like, is there something that I can do to help you get to that period of time, or like what's happening here? Can we kind of work through this together, so we can get to where we need to be? I know it's ridiculous to use peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I'm always using sandwiches and examples. So those are just a couple of quick examples. Um, I'll share in my line of work, I sometimes have to tell people that they're ending their employment. Again, not a very service-oriented thing to say, but I still try to approach those conversations with compassion, being mindful of what the experience is for the other person. I think any interaction that you go into where you're asking yourself, what's this like for them? Put yourself in their shoes. Imagine, in my case, I sit there across the room from somebody and imagine, no matter what I think about what this person has done or not done, or what they've been good at or bad at, they got to go home and tell their family tonight that they don't have a job. I try to remember that. It helps me stay in a service-oriented mindset. Lastly, about this, I would say that, remember that even doing difficult things can help reinforce company culture. A lot of times, to go back to the end of employment example, I will do that and then I'll report back to that person's direct coworkers, hey, so and so no longer works here. Here's our next steps and how we're going to, work on their workload. Again, it's just a little bit of a service-oriented approach that lets those who are still here know what's going on. So it's not this murky, sort of foggy mystery. But also, I mean, I hate to say it, but I've had people come up to me and say, things are so much better since that, person is no longer here or whatever. This can occur on an individual level too. I think a lot of times we avoid difficult conversations for understandable reasons. They're awkward, they're uncomfortable, they make us nervous or raise our heart rate or whatever. But just remember that sometimes that is a service, that I've had people come to me and say, hey, you're doing this thing and it's having this effect on me. And I've gone like, wow, I had no idea that was the case. And I really want to fix that. I can have considered it a service to me when people have given me certain types of feedback. Um, so anyway, not to belabor that one as well, but just remember that a lot of times these difficult things can reinforce your company's culture or your individual culture. I've got internal silos on that. I think that's something everyone has experienced in their life. One department doesn't like the other department for whatever reason. There's a lot of strategies for breaking that down. I'll share here at the airport. We have a monthly interdepartmental meeting. Each departmental manager or someone they designate gets up and says, here's the high level top thing, 5 things we're working on right now. Here's our challenges. We want to ask this of everybody. And I'll just say personally, even though I work with all these people all the time, every one of these meetings I walk away from going, wow, like I can't believe all this stuff all these, other people are doing. It's a way of communicating, getting a little respect in place. There's a lot of other things you can do, external events, et cetera. I won't tarry on that. Lastly, mission, vision, value statements, and aligning team goals. This is a big one. There's a lot of companies that have great mission statements, vision statements, value statements, or all of the above. I'm going to be very transparent and say, based on my personal experience, I'm not a fan. I find that they take a lot of time and energy, and they often are done by committee and therefore end up in some sort of murky territory that um, is maybe not super clear. There are a lot of great examples out there. What I would share is I think simplicity is always best when you try to define these things, and it's always going to tie back the best to what you're trying to accomplish in your culture or with internal customer service. When I think about the ones that resonate or that I remember, I think just do it, think different, uh, Coke is it. Those are a couple. I know those are advertising slogans, but they're simple and they're memorable and they tell you exactly what you need to know about the organization. Actually, in preparation for this, I looked up Nike's mission statement. Nike's mission statement, because I thought of just do it as a really recognizable thing. Their actual mission statement is bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world. If you have a body, you're an athlete. That's it. Simple. It applies to everything. Um, Here at the airport, our motto is people helping people. I initially didn't like it, but it grew on me and a lot of other people. We've started kind of pushing that ideology out to our stakeholders. We've sometimes I'll walk through the terminal and I'll hear an employee of an airline saying, "Oh, we're all about people helping people." It's simple and it encompasses everything we do. It ties back to our internal customer service approach. So that people helping people is me getting somebody an answer to a benefits question, a stakeholder helping someone find a lost bag, the UPS guy bringing the packages to the right place, et cetera. It's sort of all encompassing. A couple of really quick tips, and then I'll close this portion of the meeting. Things that have worked really well for me and for the organization that I work for, a little bit better than sort of mission exercises, is SWOT analysis. So that's a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis. We do that regularly across all departments. That helps us really understand in a lot more detail, what are we good at? What do we need to work on? What are we bad at? I mean, I think that's a good conversation. We have a culture here of reviewing scenarios, and like I said before, we debrief everything. We have a very transparent culture of feedback. We always say, be hard on the issue, not the person. Our most recent example, and this is also, aviation is very big on debriefing, but just a few weeks ago, we had a private jet that was taxiing for a takeoff, and its tires caught on fire, and the fire was growing pretty quickly. And we have firefighting staff here at the airport because of FAA regulations, and so our staff responded and put the fire out. We estimated that the fire was about a minute or maybe 90 seconds away from um, growing up towards the wing, which is where all the fuel is. Once that happened, the plane probably would have incinerated in about a minute. So this was a success. This was actually the biggest safety thing that's occurred in my 10 years here. And it was a huge success. Maybe not for the owner of the airplane, because that's an expensive fix, but from a life safety perspective, it couldn't have gone any better. But we still debriefed every single thing about it. Again, not to go into the weeds, but one of the things we discovered was all of our firefighting trained staff who do a lot of other things, they just happened to be at the south end of the airport when this happened. The plane was at the north end of the airport, at the northernmost part of the taxiway. If you got in a truck at the south end of the airport and drove that thing as fast as it could go, it would still take you 2 to 3 minutes to get to where this plane was. And that's not accounting for the time that these folks had to stop in the firehouse, don all their gear. They have to put on the oxygen tanks just like any other firefighter. So, when seconds count, yeah, that's 2 to 3 minutes is pretty quick. And yeah, we got there in time and we got the fire out, but we identified that as something that we could do better. How to do that better, we're still kind of working through, but trying to build some efficiencies. We were both successful and we got caught out at the same time. So that's an example of reviewing scenarios and debriefing. For us, that helps inform our mission a lot more than getting a committee together and trying to come up with a bunch of sort of long statements. Again, no offense to anyone who has a mission statement. I'm not knocking mission statements. I'm just kind of sharing my personal experience. And again, our approach is people helping people. So whatever it took for those guys who were on duty at that moment to get up to the north end of the taxiway and get that fire out, that's people helping people as much as anything else that we do. With that, I'm going to close down my part of the presentation. I want to say thanks again to all of you for attending. I really look forward to the questions. I'm going to share this little picture. This was the comet from 2017, or no, 2020, that was flying over the Tetons. Took this picture from the de-ice pad. But more importantly, I'm sharing my contact information. And in addition to the questions today, which we'll get to, I want to encourage any of you to reach out to me. Email is the on balance most efficient way, but I love talking to people about this stuff, and I love particularly hearing about challenges that you may have as an employee or as a manager or at your company or in whatever capacity that kind of relates to the subject, the subject that I've been talking about today. So please, um, really strongly encourage anyone to reach out to me anytime, and make that connection. So thanks for listening. Sorry I went on a little long. Back to you, Aaron. I think you're muted.
Thank you, thank you, thank you for that. We do have some questions. So,
Yes.
what type of details? Can you give us some details about the housing down payment program? You had said that you did several things related to housing, and this person is curious about what type of programs you implemented to help employees with tackling the housing issue in Jackson. They're out of Sheridan, where housing costs are also a big issue.
Similar, yeah, identical from what I understand, yeah. So we've done, there are two components related to housing that we've done. The first is what we call the housing and transportation stipend, which I mentioned. And that is a flat amount of, it's basically extra income that we give to people outside of what may be their hourly or salary. We chose this format for a number of reasons. The main one was, as we looked at that survey data, we found that for our employees who live in Teton County, their economic challenge is housing. For our employees who live in Fremont or Sublette or Lincoln County or over the border in Idaho, their economic challenge is commuting cost. They may be commuting 3 hours round trip every day and putting a couple hundred miles on their car every day. So we decided to create an equitable benefit that basically creates additional income for people. There's some benefits to the company when you carve it out separately from regular wages. It's not subject to retirement contributions, for example. It also is a separate benefit that can be adjusted, rather than just pouring that money into wages. So that's one thing that we did. The move-in loan assistance program that we have is essentially a low interest loan program. We will loan people certain amounts, not huge amounts. We can't say, oh yeah, here's the down payment to your house, but we'll loan them. Typically the limit's around $15,000, and we do about a 6-year payback term. And we charge 1% interest, not because we want to make money on people, but because if you don't, at least my CFO tells me, if we don't charge interest, then it's a taxable fringe benefit, which makes it pointless because they have to pay income taxes on it. So we will give people loans to assist with a mortgage down payment or a rental deposit, because as I'm sure is the case in Sheridan, if you want to rent a 2-bedroom apartment, I'm guessing that the deposit on that starts in the $6,000 to $8,000 range. Anyway, I don't know the exact number, but a lot. And most people don't have that kind of money sitting around. So we created that sort of low interest loan program, and we let people pay it off when and how they want to pay it. So if they want to do a regular payroll deduction, they can do that. Or if they want to pay the whole thing off, the last day that it's due, they could do that. So I hope that answers the question.
That is fabulous. Have another question.
Yes.
Can you repeat the definition of SWOT, SWOT?
Yeah. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So strengths and weaknesses tend to be, what do you do best and what do you do worst, or what do you need to work on? And then opportunities are maybe some areas that you haven't explored either in your business or in your line of work or in your individual, career path. And then threats tend to be a little bit more external or global. So like when we do this at the airport, our threats are things like availability of FAA funding, pandemics that shut down nationwide travel. Threats could be, hugely increased workforce costs, all the way to like the Yellowstone supervolcano, also a threat. It just happens to be right here. So we kind of those are some examples, but it'll be different for every business. But threats are really tend to be externals that might affect your business or your function. I suppose for me, AI is a threat, since I've heard that AI is going to replace all human resources functions. I don't know if that's true. Anyway.
I don't believe that at all. I don't believe that's gonna, it'll never replace you. Let's say that.
Well, thanks.
I have
We'll
a
see.
comment here. The housing stipend and benefits are such a tremendous support to employees. What a great example Jackson Hole Airport has been in caring about employees, both professionally and personally. I think benefits like this would be a great tool if implemented in all communities. According to the Harvard Growth Lab study, a constraint in Wyoming specifically, housing has been a challenge for many of us in recent years.
Mhm. I couldn't agree with that more. I'll just, if you don't mind, a really quick response there. And I think when we first implemented this, we got some community pushback for a number of reasons, and I'm not going to go into that in too much detail. But I think a lot of places, I mean, we basically found that what our people needed was more money. And it was unrealistic to just give everybody a $15 an hour raise or whatever it was going to be for a lot of reasons. And it's not that I don't want to say in any way that money solves everything, but sometimes it is the simplest answer. We found our housing transportation stipend to be very effective. It does not change anybody's life, and it doesn't mean that somebody who's barely getting by can suddenly buy the home of their dreams. It just helps a little, you know? In some cases it helps a lot, but it just sort of, our goal was to sort of take the edge off of it for everybody. And, we're lucky that we've had the resources to support that. But anyway, thank you for your comment. That means a lot. Thank you.
One more question. How much has the housing stipend reduced staff turnover?
Great question. Well, so before we started all of our research, the turnover was 33%. 2023 was 4%, which was sort of an outlier year. It's been in the like 8 to 10% range roughly since 2018. We've been able to keep it there very consistently. I think that's been the biggest component of it. But I also think that the move-in loan program has been part of it. We also put some professional development incentives into place. So there's certain sort of like aviation certifications or other specific certifications that you can get here um, that there's some financial incentives attached to. Essentially, I mean, through our survey, we found out that, not only why everybody was leaving, but we also found out that literally everybody who left worked here less than 3 years. And 99% of people who worked here more than 3 years stay for a really long time. And so once we identified that, we were able to focus on what do we need to do to keep people here in the first 3 years? And we need to offer them opportunities for growth, that may or may not be attached to their exact job. Maybe it's not going to be a rung up on a ladder or a box on an org chart, but a way to grow and learn more and get, nothing major, but a small financial incentive to do that. So I think it's really been the whole thing that's allowed us to drive turnover down. Not just the stipend, but I do think that's probably the biggest piece.
Another question. Why wouldn't a salary hike help more than a stipend? I always push to get people raises, and you said a lot of reasons.
I did. We've also increased wages. I don't want to give anyone the idea that we've frozen wages since 2018. We try to stay current with the market for every position that we have. Some of them there's local markets, some of them there's more national sort of aviation specific markets. I mean, there's not a right or wrong answer to the question. I can just share that the reason in it. So sorry, now I'm rambling. I'll share number one, we have increased wages as well. But the reason that we haven't, that we did the stipend as well is because when you exponentially increase wages, there's a lot of other costs associated with that. Like we're in the Wyoming retirement system, which is a wonderful retirement benefit. It's a pension plan and it requires an 18% and change contribution. So our, if we put all the money that we put into that stipend into wages, there would be this other exponential cost increase of 17 to 18% on top of that. We're not trying to keep, retirement contributions out of anyone's pocket. It's an additional expense. Also, our board of directors at the time they wanted it to be separate so that they could increase it or potentially decrease it depending on economic circumstances. We've never had a decrease, and I hope we never do, but it's really hard to cut pay. It's a little easier to cut a benefit if you need to. But I mean, what I'm talking about, I don't want to give anybody the impression that we're sitting here going, yeah, let's cut this for the fun of it or because we're whatever. It's more like we wanted to plan for, I mean, and COVID was a perfect example of this, even though we didn't change anything during COVID, but we wanted to plan for a massive emergency. If there was something like that that shut down national air travel, if we ever had to, look at cutting staff, we'd have this benefit that we could take out before we started, looking at cutting people. All that said, that's the approach that our management board chose. So I don't know if that answers the question or if it makes it murkier.
The comment back was, that makes sense. Thank you.
Oh, good. Whew.
I
Okay.
do have a couple more questions.
Please, yeah.
Is a stipend taxed differently than a wage?
No.
Okay. And then, do you have reentry interviews with employees that have left and came back to see why they came back? If you do, how do you use that information going forward?
I'm going to say, no, we don't. And thank you for the idea. I think when we've had rehires, that happens conversationally. Like I'm sitting here thinking, I think I know why people have come back, but now that I want to, yeah, but thank you very much to whoever asked that question, because now I'm going to do that. I'll make it, I don't do anything too formally, but I'll make a point to kind of ask those questions and track them. That's a great idea. And that's a great example of the types of things I was trying to talk about in the, asking people what they need. It's not always, the current people, but it could be someone returning. So yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Wonderful. It looks like that is it for the questions, unless we have any last second questions. Go ahead and throw them up there. Otherwise, thank you, Tony, so very, very much. This
Thank
has
you.
been fabulous.
Thank you so much.
I
Thanks.
have learned, like, the intersection of internal customer service and company culture is amazing. Something that we really never thought about, but now we will. So thank you.
Thanks.
Before we move on, before everybody takes off, I would love for you to take a survey on today's presentation. Your input helps us make these sessions even better, so we'd appreciate your thoughts. Tricia has just added that link to the chat. In the next few days, we're going to email you the recording and the slides as well. And while you're completing the survey, we are going to post another link, if you'd move to the next slide, Tony, where you can register for our next presentation. So discover the essentials of Wyoming's workers' compensation process in this dynamic panel discussion designed for both employers and employees. Whether you're an employer looking to understand your responsibilities or an employee seeking clarity on your rights, this session is going to provide actionable insights, practical advice, and answers to your most pressing questions. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining us today. Tony, thank you again. We really, really appreciated all this.
Thank you. It was fun.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful day, and we'll see you all in March. Thank you.